You think medieval chivalry was only honor, prayer, and the clash of swords. But behind banners and shining armor was something unspoken. Brotherhoods were more than vows of loyalty. They were bodies pledged, not only swords. Not hidden. Not rare. Celebrated. Before we continue, subscribe if you crave buried truths. Leave a comment with your country. It helps us uncover shadows history prefers forgotten. Now back to the story. Let's start with initiation. When a knight swore loyalty to his order, the ceremony was not simple prayer. It was intimate, physical, ritualized. Two men kneeling, exchanging vows that blurred sacred devotion with carnal undertone. Chroniclers whispered of kisses of peace that lingered too long. The bond was sealed with more than words. These oaths were public, yet their meaning was cloaked. Monks recorded gestures without explanation. Scholars softened language to hide implications. But among knights, everyone understood. A brotherhood of steel demanded a brotherhood of flesh. Their strength depended on bonds others would not dare name. Not written, not confessed, yet alive. Children destined for orders began training young. Pages served knights, fetching armor, cleaning weapons, running errands. But their duties often extended into the night. Accounts speak of boys chosen not only for skill but for beauty. The most attractive were drawn close, praised for loyalty, rewarded with privilege. And used. A boy's body became currency within the order. Masters shaped them as clay, molding devotion through physical submission. It was called discipline. It was called instruction. But in truth it was domination. The line between service and exploitation vanished beneath the banner of loyalty. Victims were silent. Orders were strong. Women too were caught in the web. Knightly orders forbade marriage, demanding celibacy. But the absence of women did not remove desire. It redirected it. Ladies visiting castles were treated with suspicion. Yet rumors spread of widows offering comfort to whole companies of men. And punishments followed those who strayed. Slaves filled the gap. Prisoners of war became property of the order. Records show young captives assigned as servants. Their roles were deliberately vague. They slept near their masters, attended them in private chambers, shared their tents during campaigns. Their voices are missing from history, but their presence speaks volumes. The army itself institutionalized these practices. Brotherhood was celebrated as the highest bond. Chronicles describe warriors charging together, dying together, buried side by side. Yet hints remain that this intimacy was more than symbolic. Ritual bathing, shared beds, whispered vows before battle. Not hidden, not rare, celebrated. Religion wrapped these acts in sacred language. Knights invoked saints to sanctify bonds that crossed ordinary limits. Priests turned a blind eye. Some wrote cautious warnings condemning unnatural attachments in vague terms. But papal courts rarely intervened. For the church, loyalty in war mattered more than purity in bed. Magic lingered too. Charms exchanged between brothers, rings blessed with whispered spells. Superstition promised that bonds sealed with flesh would make warriors invincible. Some knights carried talismans from their lovers into battle. If the brother died, the survivor wore relics as sacred tokens. The order itself became a cult of desire. Historians have long debated these shadows. Some dismiss accounts as exaggerations. Others admit too many coincidences remain. Manuscripts across Europe hint at the same hidden truth. Brotherhood was not only military, not only spiritual. It was physical, institutional, and essential. The orders endured because their bonds were unbreakable. But the victims remain invisible. Pages taken too young, prisoners stripped of choice, widows discarded when vows demanded celibacy. The powerful legalized crimes, while the powerless were erased. This is the moral lesson buried under stone castles and shining armor. What we call chivalry often hid something darker. You think the knight's tent was only a place for prayer before battle. But inside canvas walls, oaths turned into flesh. Men called it brotherhood. Chroniclers called it loyalty. But soldiers whispered of rituals that blurred into desire. Not hidden. Not rare. Celebrated. The army camp was crowded, filthy tents. Tents pressed together, voices carrying in the night. Yet in the command tents secrecy reigned. Pages carried wine, torches burned low. And behind closed flaps brothers sealed bonds no sword could break. The battlefield was fed by intimacy as much as steel. Children remained the most vulnerable. Boys captured in raids were delivered to knightly orders. They were dressed as servants, but their duties were not written in records. Chroniclers left silences that speak louder than words. A boy placed in a knight's tent did not sleep alone. Loyalty was manufactured through submission. Women's bodies too were consumed, though often in shadows. Knights sworn to celibacy were forbidden marriage, yet campaigns brought them into villages where peasants had no defense. Women became spoils sanctified as necessary relief. Priests excused these sins as weaknesses of flesh. Confessions were made. Absolution was granted. The pattern continued. Slaves were the silent foundation of the orders. Captives from Saracen raids, children from conquered towns, they filled kitchens, stables, private chambers. Their labor fed the orders. Their bodies fed the knights. They were sold, traded, discarded. Their names lost. Their suffering erased by the records of victors who depended on them. Religion turned this into holy purpose. Priests preached sacrifice, loyalty, obedience. Sermons blurred lines between spiritual devotion and bodily submission. To serve a brother was to serve Christ. To obey without question was proof of faith. These teachings sanctified exploitation. Faith became the shield behind which abuse thrived. Magic added another layer of darkness. Rituals promised strength through shared blood. Brothers cut their palms, pressed wounds together, swore never to betray. Some drank from the same cup, whispering invocations to saints. Others exchanged relics, bones of martyrs worn near the heart. Bonds were spiritual, bonds were physical, bonds were irreversible. The army itself demanded these bonds. Soldiers fought best when tied by more than duty. Commanders knew this. Intimacy was encouraged, not forbidden. When brothers marched side by side, desire became discipline. Men bled for each other, not only from loyalty but from love. Military efficiency was built on hidden flesh. The church rarely intervened. Accusations arose, but inquiries disappeared. Papal councils condemned unnatural practices in vague words. Orders denied everything, pointing to victories on the battlefield. As long as the cross advanced, sins behind closed doors were ignored. God's army could not be questioned even when shadows darkened its halls. Historians uncover fragments, letters hinting at friendships too close, accounts of knights sharing beds, gifts, even inheritances, testimonies from captured servants who described what they saw. Each piece is small. Alone they could be dismissed. Together they form a pattern, a truth hidden but undeniable. Not mistake, not rumor. Institution. The victims paid the price. Children molded into tools. Women treated as spoils. Slaves stripped of humanity. Their stories barely survive. Only faint traces remain in margins, in confessions, in whispers. The orders prospered, but at a cost measured in broken lives. The powerful legalized crimes. Victims were erased. You think the Knights' Chapel echoed only with hymns and prayers. But within stone walls vows hid darker confessions. Chivalry promised purity. Reality delivered corruption. Brotherhood masked desire. Not whispered, not mistaken. Celebrated. Ceremonies blurred, sacred and profane. Two knights knelt before the altar, swords crossed, hands clasped. Priests blessed their bond with holy water. Yet the ritual went further. Kisses lingered. Touches extended. Chroniclers wrote of united souls, but witnesses knew bodies were bound too. The church wrapped flesh in scripture. Children stood in the shadows. Pages carried candles, watched their masters kneel, learned loyalty through silence. But silence demanded complicity. A boy who refused a knight's attention was beaten or cast out. Those who yielded were rewarded with praise gifts, armor of their own. Abuse wore the mask of mentorship. Women hovered at the margins. Noble ladies admired knights in ceremonies but were forbidden true closeness. Orders rejected marriage. Instead, women became tokens of rivalry, exchanged in tournaments, invoked in poems but rarely touched. This exclusion twisted desire inward, redirecting passion toward brothers who were always near, always available. Slaves endured the harshest fate. In some orders, captured prisoners were paraded before the brethren after victories. Young captives were offered to knights as living spoils. Chroniclers avoided detail, but descriptions of service leave no doubt. These children bore the weight of oaths they never swore. Their silence was enforced by chains. The army codified secrecy. Brothers swore never to betray the order's rights. Penalties for disclosure were death. Some statutes survive forbidding unnatural sin, yet threatening harsher punishment for revealing the Brotherhood's secrets. Silence was more important than purity. Discipline mattered more than innocence. The law protected the order, not its victims. Religion legitimized the system. Preachers proclaimed that true brothers shared everything. Some invoked Christ and John saints bound in spiritual love as justification. Others declared that bonds of flesh made bonds of war unbreakable. The sacrament of loyalty swallowed the sin of desire. Faith made what was forbidden sacred. Magic seeped into rituals. Brothers carried charms, written prayers folded into belts, vials of blood exchanged under moonlight. Belief promised protection from arrows and blades. Some whispered that flesh shared in secret gave invulnerability. Warriors embraced superstition when fear of death was constant. Survival demanded rituals beyond prayer. Historians uncover fragments in dusty archives, manuscripts with scratched-out lines, marginalia warning of sins within orders, accusations in court records carefully worded to avoid scandal. Too many fragments converge. The pattern is clear. Brotherhood was more than a vow. It was a system repeated across castles, camps, and chapels. The victims remain voiceless, pages scarred by lessons never chosen, women displaced by vows they could not challenge, slaves stripped of humanity and hidden in shadows. Their suffering was not accident. It was woven into the fabric of knighthood. The powerful legalized crimes. Victims were erased. You think tournaments were only contests of jousts and shining armor, but behind the cheers darker games unfolded. Knights clashed with lances in public. In private they bound each other with intimacy. Violence on the field mirrored passion in the tent. Not hidden. Not rare. Celebrated. The lists were crowded with nobles and ladies. Songs praised courage, banners fluttered, crowds roared. But after dusk the spectacle shifted. Knights retired to pavilions where loyalty was renewed in secrecy. Servants carried wine, guards were dismissed, and bonds forged in combat dissolved into flesh. The battlefield's heat never ended with sunset. Children were present here too. Pages prepared horses, polished armor held torches at night. But their duties stretched beyond service. Some were summoned into tents by masters who spoke of loyalty but practiced domination. The most obedient received gifts, better clothes, faster paths to knighthood. Submission was the currency of advancement. Women watched but remained excluded. Poems celebrated the Lady of the Heart, but her presence was symbolic. Real devotion played out between men. Chroniclers described knights refusing marriage because no woman could equal the bond of arms. Chivalric romance hid a truth: passion belonged not to wives but to brothers. Slaves bore the heaviest silence. Captives from defeated armies were paraded in chains at tournaments, trophies of conquest. Many were taken into service afterward, some never leaving the tents of their captors. Chronicles praised tournaments as spectacles of honor, but beneath them lay exploitation, as calculated as any battle plan. The army encouraged this structure. Military orders knew that passion created loyalty. Commanders preferred men bound by more than duty. Brothers who shared bodies would never betray each other in battle. Desire became discipline. Love became command. The order became unbreakable precisely because flesh had been consumed together. Religion provided cover. Priests blessed tournaments, sanctified victories, heard confessions after indulgence. Forgiveness was cheap when warriors shed blood for Christ. Absolution washed away not only sins of violence but sins of flesh. The church needed soldiers more than purity. Priests chose silence where justice should have spoken. Magic lurked in shadows of the lists. Knights wore charms sewn into tunics, rings exchanged by sworn brothers, talismans carved with sacred names. Some believed flesh shared before battle made them invincible. Legends grew of warriors who could not fall protected by more than armor. Desire became superstition. Superstition became truth. Historians uncover scattered clues, poems that exalt love of brothers, letters between knights written with longing disguised as chivalric courtesy, manuals that condemned unnatural acts too often to be coincidence. The repetition reveals normalization. This was not accident. This was structure. Not whispered, not rumor. Institution. The victims remain in shadows. Children robbed of childhood molded into silence. Women displaced by vows they could not alter. Slaves stripped of choice reduced to spoils. Their suffering fed a system that thrived for centuries. The powerful legalized crimes. Victims were erased. You think crusades were only holy wars fought for faith. But crusader camps hid rituals as dark as battlefields. Knights carried the cross on their shields. They carried desire in their tents. War sanctified violence. War sanctified flesh. Not hidden, not rare. Celebrated. Marching east was brutal. Dust hunger plague haunted the armies. Yet within the ranks brotherhood thrived. Soldiers slept in pairs, shared rations, shared wounds. Chroniclers wrote of unbreakable bonds but left silences where intimacy lay. War demanded loyalty beyond blood. Loyalty was forged in secrecy, not scripture. Children marched too. Pages rode with knights serving at tables, tending weapons. But their innocence was consumed in camps where men outnumbered women 10-1. Captives became currency. Boys too young for war became victims of it. Their tears never reached the pages of chronicles. Their voices vanished in dust. Women were present, though rarely by choice. Some followed armies as camp followers, many enslaved along the way. Others were seized from villages, their bodies considered spoils of faith. Confessors excused warriors, declaring conquest made sin invisible. Celibacy vows dissolved under hunger for flesh. Women became casualties long before swords struck. Slaves filled the crusader camps. Saracen captives were marched in chains, assigned as attendants to knights. Some were forced to share tents, bodies included. They existed without names, without rights, surviving only as shadows in Christian chronicles. Their suffering was sanctified as victory. Their humiliation was called triumph. Religion sanctified the system. Priests marched with armies offering mass each dawn. They preached purity yet closed eyes to tents at night. Absolution was granted by morning. Victory washed away sins. Faith became shield, confession became currency, and the cycle continued unbroken. The cross forgave what it should have condemned. Magic traveled with the crusaders. Charms from relic sellers, bones of saints, phials of blood said to protect in battle. Brothers exchanged tokens, swore that flesh shared made swords sharper, shields stronger. Some whispered of invulnerability when bonds were sealed by both prayer and desire. Superstition turned abuse into ritual. The army depended on this hidden order. Commanders saw how men bound by intimacy fought harder, died slower, retreated less. Brotherhood was not accident, it was policy. Not written in charters but lived in tents. Victory demanded flesh as much as steel. The Crusades thrived on both. Historians find the traces. Papal bulls condemning sins among warriors. Letters from bishops shocked at what they witnessed. Saracen chroniclers describing captives abused by holy soldiers. The pattern emerges. Too many voices, too many fragments, all pointing the same way. Not mistake, not rumor. Institution. Victims bore the weight. Children scarred before manhood. Women erased from dignity. Slaves stripped of humanity. Their stories remain buried under triumphal tales of holy war. The powerful legalized crimes. Victims were erased. You think castles were only fortresses of stone and banners. But their halls sheltered darker rites than battle ever revealed. Loyalty carved in stone. Desire carved in flesh. Brotherhood was not only sworn. It was consumed. Not whispered. Not rare. Celebrated. Inside, routines blurred sacred with profane. Morning prayers echoed through chapels, but nights belonged to secrecy. Knights shared chambers with chosen brothers. Pages slept nearby, summoned at will. The architecture itself, narrow staircases, locked towers, protected intimacy from curious eyes. Castles were temples of war, but also temples of hidden flesh. Children grew up within these walls. Pages arrived at 7 or 8, taught obedience through service. Yet obedience meant more than carrying swords or tending horses. Some were taken into bed, molded by masters who called it training. Silence became survival. Praise came at the cost of innocence. Childhood dissolved in stone corridors. Women lived in shadows of castles, but rarely within them. Orders excluded, wives forbade families. Ladies were guests, not companions. They inspired poems, not touch. Real passion circled back to brothers who never left one another's side. Female absence did not remove desire. It redirected it, shaping bonds that endured in secrecy. Slaves were everywhere. Captives brought from wars, chained in kitchens, stables, and chambers. Chronicles note servants but omit their fates. Some served food, others served flesh. Their suffering was invisible by design. Castles preserved loyalty of knights, while erasing humanity of slaves. Their cries vanished in stone as surely as records erased their names. The army's statutes made silence law. Breaking vows meant death. To speak of secrets was treason. Rules forbade unnatural practices, yet punishments fell heavier on betrayal than on sin itself. Orders cared less about purity than about control. The system survived because silence was enforced harder than morality. Religion wove excuses. Priests sanctified bonds with blessings, sermons absolution. Brotherhood was preached as holy duty. Knights were told their love mirrored the apostles. Desire cloaked itself in scripture. What was forbidden outside walls became sacred inside them. Faith made exploitation invisible. The church's silence became complicity. Magic lingered in corners of castles. Knights exchanged charms, blood-signed vows, whispered incantations under moonlight. Relics blessed by saints were worn beside tokens gifted by lovers. Superstition promised invulnerability when flesh and faith were fused. Some swore entire sieges were survived through secret bonds. Magic made abuse eternal. Historians chase fragments, charters with erased lines, monastic complaints of sins unnamed, ballads praising brother love in veiled terms, court records accusing pages of slander when they spoke. Too many fragments converge. A structure appears, not rumor, not error, institution. The legacy is silence, victims forgotten in archives, children shaped into tools robbed of innocence, women erased by vows that denied them place, slaves reduced to shadows, all sacrificed for loyalty that served power. The powerful legalized crimes. Victims were erased.